Well, you're going to talk about inclusion strategies and disability gymnastics. And just have to read my notes that Jessica Capelli-Bevan, you're the Gymnastics Participation Inclusion Officer. Very nice
That's
title.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, splendid. And Angela, you are the chair of the Disability Gymnastics panel, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We're so excited. Please give us some information about your work and your journey in British Gymnastics. Go ahead. Thank you.
We will do. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for this fantastic opportunity to be able to come and share some of the work that we're doing back in the UK with yourselves. It was an absolute privilege to get the invitation. So on behalf of myself and Angie, I just want to say a really big thank you. Is it Patrick or Max? Would you mind please bringing up the first slide? Excellent. And the next one, please. Thank you very much. So I thought it would be helpful to start the presentation with looking at our current landscape in the UK and what our current numbers look like. So currently in 2020, we had around 668 clubs out of 1,500 clubs registered with us that confirmed that they deliver disability provision to their members in the clubs. So back in the UK, when clubs affiliate with us on an annual basis, they have to tick the disciplines that they deliver, and disability gymnastics is one of those disciplines. That's not to say that they need to have any additional qualifications for it, but in order for us to be able to gauge and capture some of the detail and know how inclusive our clubs are, we do ask the question. So this equates to around 6,369 disabled gymnasts in the UK. It is important, though, to note that not every gymnast declares if they have a disability. So when our members register, they have to declare it themselves. And with some disabilities, gymnasts don't believe that there is a disability. So, for example, if you have a gymnast that is deaf, for example, many people from the deaf community don't actually see that being deaf is a disability, and so they won't declare it on our paperwork. And so essentially, some of the numbers sometimes are not as accurate as they could potentially be. In terms of the UK, so there's around 8% of disabled children in the UK. However, when we look at our membership base at British Gymnastics, we see that only 2% of British Gymnastics members are disabled. So there's a disparity there of about 6%, which we're looking to close the bridge and build and develop initiatives to try and close that a little bit more. And further on in the presentation, I'll talk you through what British Gymnastics and some of the initiatives that we are doing and developing to try and do that. It's also important to note that in 2018, we conducted some insight and some research, and actually it showed that only 9% of our coaches felt confident coaching gymnastics to disabled people, which for us acted as a really big catalyst to invest some money in the area of disability gymnastics, because if only 9% of our coaches felt confident, then actually that's 91 coaches or 91% of coaches saying that they're not confident, they don't really know what to do. So we felt very much that it's our duty of care to produce initiatives that will help to cater for that gap. And I think it's important to note that also in the UK, we have something called the Equality Act. And the Equality Act is the legislation that we underpin all of our work on. The Equality Act is the law, and there are 9 protected characteristics that sit under the Equality Act, and disability being one of those. So we just need to be mindful as well that from a legal perspective, there is an obligation there for us to do something, even though morally we also want to do it. So we've had various discussions with the Swedish Federation of Gymnastics to and fro, kind of trying to get ideas on some of the things that we could present about. And one of the areas that we got asked to deliver on was inclusive versus dedicated sessions, and what's the difference between each and why should you do both? And in the UK, we have both that run. We have some clubs that deliver inclusive sessions. We have some clubs that deliver dedicated sessions specifically for disabled participants. So in terms of dedicated sessions, there are some benefits because they can be impairment specific. And so, for example, you could have a class for autistic children or for children with a particular physical impairment or a visual impairment. And so if specific adaptations are required, these types of sessions can allow for that to happen quite specifically. They also allow, from a social perspective, people to interact with each other and have a common ground. However, on the con side of that, and the negative, I guess, is that it does put up barriers to other people attending. So if somebody has a different impairment, or actually if they are non-disabled and would like to access a session anyway, then they can't. So those are some of the considerations for having dedicated sessions. From an inclusive session perspective, they can be accessible for anyone with a disability, regardless of their impairment. And coaches need to adapt the sessions accordingly to be participant-centred. They're easy to facilitate if they're inclusive because they're part of the existing club timetable. So coaches might feel more confident and comfortable delivering these sessions. And I know that in the UK, the majority of our clubs look at the inclusive model and inclusive delivery. However, we also have some fantastic clubs where they have specialist coaches that are confident and actually deliver to specific impairments. And Angela's club, which she'll talk to you about later, explores all the different options in terms of delivery. So the challenge with delivering an inclusive session is potentially having the additional support in place for members if they need it. So if you do have a child that has a particular disability and you don't have a coach available, it's also being mindful that you need to have additional visual aids. So cones, arrows on the floor, pictures of the skills and progressions, maybe colour contrast, also allowing individuals to familiarise themselves in the gym with adaptations and also before the session starts. So, for example, if you have a wheelchair user, thinking of ways that if you are delivering a game, that all members can work at different levels and use different body parts to travel. I think what's important to note is that there is no one size fits all approach. It's about taking the time to consider what resources you have as a club, the space available, the workforce. So what coaches do you have and what training needs do they have? And do they have a passion for wanting to work with children or individuals that have disabilities of a different range and programme as well? It's about what works for your club. And both approaches, both inclusive and dedicated, can work as well as each other, providing it meets the individual needs of a gymnast. One of the models that we look at and that we encourage as well for clubs to use is a STEPS model. So STEPS is widely known in the UK, and basically it asks you to look at, S stands for space. So looking at the space that you have available, how does that need to be adapted? The T looks at the task. So if you are delivering a particular task, what particular adaptations need to be made for certain individuals? E is for equipment. So do you need to adjust the height of the beam, for example? Do you need a different colour mat for a dismount so that you have colour contrast and the like? P is for people. So do you have coaches that feel confident delivering the session? And S is the speed. So the speed of the session. So do you need to allow extra time, say for a rotation on equipment, if you have a particular gymnast that maybe requires a little bit more time, say if they have cerebral palsy or if they are a wheelchair user, they'll just need a little bit more time to get around the gym to enable that to happen. We are we launched actually last week a new workshop for our clubs, and it focuses specifically on the STEPS model. But I'll cover that in a little bit more detail later on. Max, could you please change the slide for me? Thank you. So this slide highlights some of the key areas to consider, helping you to create an inclusive environment. The information has been provided by the Activity Alliance, who were formerly named the English Federation of Disability Sport. And they're the leading voice for disabled people in sport and activity. They're funded through Sport England in the UK in the same way that us as British Gymnastics receive Sport England funding too. And they offer support to national governing bodies of sport and other organisations around inclusion. They also conduct research, and their vision is to create fairness for disabled people in sport and activity. So this diagram summarises and categorises potential barriers and what we could potentially do to address some of those barriers. So if we look at the physical barriers that Activity Alliance have highlighted, their particular interests are around facility. So the access to the facility, including in and around a facility. We look at the gym, The changing rooms, the toilets, are they accessible? Are they not accessible? So those are some considerations. And we do have resources in the UK that support and guide our clubs through all of those different areas. When we're looking at equipment, so we're still looking at physical as an area, we look at the quantity of the equipment. How much will you require if you're using hand apparatus, say? What colours will you require? And is the equipment accessible? So that's kind of looking at your larger trampoline, perhaps, your bars and things like that. And your health and safety. So make sure that you risk assess everything. Make sure that you have personal evacuation plans in place. So in the UK, we have something called a personal evacuation plan, and that links to a particular individual that has a disability. So if, for example, you need to evacuate a building for an emergency, what particular considerations do you need to have in place for that individual? If we move on to the next area, it's psychological. So according to Activity Alliance, psychological is actually the most influential barrier that participants face. So it's around the perception of the sport and the attitudes and changing those perceptions and attitudes. So many coaches feel that they are too scared or they're not confident to coach a disabled person because they see them and they're like, I don't know what to do. How do I adapt my coaching to be able to cater for them? And this is why we're creating some resources back in the UK to try and address some of those attitudes and change some of those perceptions so that coaches feel more empowered and they feel more confident to think that actually any child, regardless of ability or disability, can be treated in the same way. It's just a case of making adaptations, just as you would for a preschool child. And so it's trying to get our community to think like that. When we then look at the next area, so logistical. So logistical is looking at areas such as geography. So where is your club located and how can people travel to it? So can they get there by car, by train, by bus, by tram, and making sure that that's communicated in advance so people know what to expect. Looking at the expense, so how expensive are the sessions and are they affordable? And for example, support. So the workforce available in your club and what additional support is required. When we look at communication, it's where will you share the information to reach the participants? So you're going to work with external agencies to do that. And how can you adapt the information to meet the needs of your community? Also, how are you going to get some feedback from the participants? So how will you know that the sessions are working? And the only way you will do that is really to involve people. So to have those one-to-one conversations with them to be able to cater for them as best as possible, or even signpost them to another club that is able to cater for them, but being honest about that whole journey with them. Could you please change the slide? Thanks, Max. So we're now going to look at why be inclusive, and we've, as a national governing body of sport, we've decided to analyse this into 4 different areas. So what are the benefits and the reasons to offer inclusive programme at your club? So from an environmental perspective, it helps to build your workforce. So it helps to offer training, it helps to teach your coaches on how to learn about various adaptations that they can use, not only with disabled participants, but also with your non-disabled participants too. It creates a happy and fun environment for everybody because everyone feels included. And also you need to work on gaining the trust from parents and gymnasts. And this is what I was talking about earlier, about building those relationships, having those one-to-one conversations. And at British Gymnastics, we've developed a bit of a template to help guide clubs through that conversation. What type of questions should they be asking? What kind of information should they be capturing so that they can offer a best session and experience as possible? And that will help you to obviously be a supportive club. If we look at the opportunities, it means that you're able to offer opportunities for disabled people. It allows you to develop links with the local community and wider. So we work with local authorities and local organisations to be able to signpost participants to come and utilise your venue, maybe when you have quiet time in your programme. It helps you to become more visible in the local community as a club, so it builds your reputation. It develops your workforce further, but it also creates futures. So your future workforce, your future coaches. From a legislation perspective, it complies with the Equality Act of 2010. We look at reasonable adjustments. So that's what the Equality Act kind of underpins very much. It's about what reasonable adjustments can we make to make these opportunities as fair as possible to disabled participants. It means that you're following good practice and you're being fair as a club. And you're providing equal opportunities to all your members, but also from a safeguarding perspective, it's your duty of care to make sure that if a participant wants to access gymnastics, that you allow them to do so. And then from a financial perspective, as a club, it helps you to attract new members. It attracts additional funding streams. So I know in the UK, you're able to access additional pots of money through the local authority or maybe through Sport England in order to deliver gymnastics specifically to disabled people. It helps to grow your timetable. So I've had many clubs contact me to say, oh, we're really quiet during the day when the children are at school and before they come to gym club. What sort of sessions could we maybe put on in the middle of the day? And so now they're creating links with special schools and with individuals that maybe don't go to school. And so there's lots of different opportunities to fill that timetable. And inevitably, it will help you to grow your club. So I thought it would be helpful just to share some examples of what clubs in the UK have done to be inclusive, because I appreciate I can tell you all the theory, but in terms of how it works on a day-to-day basis and some things that have actually happened, I thought it would bring it to life a bit more for you. So some of the examples from clubs. So one club changed the lights to make the trample track brighter for any of their participants that had a visual impairment. A club installed wall lights directly facing the track for the same reason. Another club purchased sensory equipment and provided a sensory area for their members to use when required for break times and for time out or for play. So for example, if you have any participants that are autistic or have autism. Another club provided extra workforce during sessions where gymnasts with additional needs require extra support and more time. So they trained more of their coaches to feel confident in order to deliver more sessions. Another club did the same, so they trained up staff on numerous impairments and conditions to ensure that they have confident and competent teams supporting their sessions. One club said that their inclusive action plan is a working document and will be adapted as required. So they'll look at it on a regular basis and depending on the needs of their individuals, they'll update it accordingly. So it's an actual living document. It's not just something that they create, put to one side and not look at. And then finally, one club, which I thought was quite interesting. So they ordered a velour club leotard identical to the club lycra one for an autistic child so that she could compete, because she did not like the velour fabric and the texture and was really keen to compete. And so they adapted, and the simple adaptation was just to change the fabric of the leotard. And the gymnast was then able to take part in the competition without feeling uncomfortable or triggering any of her anxieties and the likes. Thank you, Max. Moving on. I appreciate we're tight for time too, so if I am whizzing through, we have time for questions at the end, but I also will leave my contact details. So in terms of the support from British Gymnastics, these are some of the areas that we offer support in, and I'll just talk you through these. So the disability guide, and these are all available on our British Gymnastics website. So please do take the time to find them, access them, read them and digest them in your own time. The disability guide provides a step-by-step guide on how to set up and establish an inclusive programme. And it looks at various areas of how you can do that. So for example, when you're looking at your marketing and communications, how might you want to communicate to your members? What font is best to use? What colours are best to use? It talks about your facility and accessing your facility and some of the considerations around that. The disability FAQ document currently sits on our website too, and it's bespoke for leisure centres, but we also have one bespoke for clubs in our Club Hub Club, which is a new portal that's just been developed. And it provides answers to the most common questions around insurance, qualifications, terminology to use. So that's another area. What can I say? What can't I say? And it provides lots of answers around that. Processes and protocols, as well as advice on different approaches that can be adopted when delivering an inclusive gymnastics session. Our inclusion specialists, we have 10 of them across the country, and they are all volunteers. So they support from a coaching perspective to any coach or site who wishes to establish or further develop their inclusive gymnastics programme. They all have a specialism in different areas around inclusion. So some have an expertise in working with children that have Down syndrome, others with children that have autism or cerebral palsy, and they all offer free advice to all of our clubs to help them grow and develop in the area. In terms of continued professional development, there's a number of workshops that we have available. So we have our Disability Gymnastics Awareness module. So this is a one-day training course. It is a face-to-face course. Unfortunately, due to COVID, this hasn't been delivered in the last 18 months or so. So we had to look at different ways that we could reach our coaches and educate them and help them to develop without the face-to-face. And we did that through developing an inclusive coaching e-learning course. And we worked with the national disability sports organisations here in the UK to develop the content for that. And it's fully supported by the Activity Alliance too. And to date, we've had just over 1,300 of our coaches access that e-learning. And what we do is we use the feedback from the e-learning to then further develop different areas of the learning. So, for example, we've had a number of requests now for Tourette's, which isn't really an impairment that we'd encountered before as a sport. But on the back of COVID, it transpires that a lot of our gymnasts are feeling anxious and some have developed Tourette's. And so some of our coaches are saying, what do we do if a child has a tic? And what if that tic is swearing, for example, and there's younger children in the gym? How do we address that? So those are some of the areas that we're now starting to scope out in a little bit more detail. We also worked with UK Deaf Sport to develop gymnastics communication videos using British Sign Language, and those are available on the website too. And we've had just over 460 coaches access those so far. So with British Sign Language, we had never had any signs for gymnastics in the past, so we worked with them to create some brand new ones, and they are videos and they're accessible for any of our coaches to utilise. We also deliver face-to-face workshops, which we had to adapt to webinars, and that's for clubs, so club managers, for leisure centres, and also for our schools. So we operate in multiple environments, and we try to support each of those environments with the CPD that we deliver. Moving on then to our bite-sized videos. Again, these are accessible and available on our website. So we currently have 3. So the bite-sized video are kind of 2 to 5 minute videos that just offer a snapshot in different areas of inclusion. So we have the STEPS model, the activity inclusion model, and inclusive facilities. We also have an inclusion webcast available to our clubs, and that sits on our club hub. We have dedicated support, so that's through myself and some of my colleagues and Angela and the inclusion specialists at British Gymnastics. And we have the Disability Gymnastics panel too. And the Disability Gymnastics panel was formed in 2020 with the aim of looking at the performance side of disability gymnastics. And I'm not going to keep talking about that because Angela will lead on from that in a moment. So in terms of what next for us as a sport, so we're looking to review the Code of Sports Governance. So every national governing body of sport in the UK has been tasked with creating a detailed and ambitious equality, diversity and inclusion plan. And British Gymnastics has committed at board level that disability is one of the top priorities for equality, diversity and inclusion for the next cycle. So hopefully that will mean additional investment into the area and resource. We are looking to maintain our advanced equality standard. So that's something that we did obtain back in the UK. We're going to, as I say, we've just launched our Inclusion in Your Club webinar for club managers. So we're looking at supporting our club managers because we realised that delivering workshops was great to club coaches, but if they go back to their club and their managers are not interested in putting on any additional sessions for disabled participants, then it doesn't really make a difference. What we need to do is influence those club managers to embrace disability gymnastics and then train their coaches. We're also going to continue supporting our facility projects. So making sure that at the expression of interest phase, so we offer funding for facility projects here in the UK. And at the expression of interest phase, we now ask the question, how is your project going to be inclusive? How are you going to target some of those groups and how are you going to deliver that? And we offer that support. We're going to continue working in partnership both internally and externally. So that's with all the national disability sports organisations and with across departments internally as well. We've also launched Rise Gymnastics. So this has been developed to be fully inclusive and includes adaptations, and it's our new reward program that has replaced the previous proficiency scheme. So what was all the badges and things like that. So all the information around Rise Gymnastics is again available on the British Gymnastics website. I'm going to hand over to Angela now, if that's okay, because I realise time is slipping away from us, and yes, Angela's going to talk us through classification and some of the other areas linked to performance pathways for disability gymnasts in the UK.
Thanks, Jess. So my section of the presentation is going to focus more on the competitive side of disability gymnastics, both on a national level, but also my own experience of running a large club that has lots of disabled gymnasts. So firstly, I just want to take you through how we classify disability gymnasts. So currently what we ask gymnasts to do if they're competing at a national level is to fill out a classification pack. This is signed off by the doctor, who chooses one of these profiles that you can see on the screen. This is then submitted to British Gymnastics, and we kind of store that information and use that information to decide on the classification groups for each activity. In practice, currently we only use 2 classification groups for competitions. So we have Class 1, which is learning disability, and Class 2, which is physical or sensory impairment. And this is really due to the numbers that compete within each classification group. So we simplify this when it comes to events, and this is constantly under review. We're looking at whether this is kind of fit for practice as each discipline develops, but this is what we do currently. So if we move on to think about the support that we provide for competitive programmes, so if we look at the next slide. So in terms of competitive activity, this is how it's supported by BG. As Jess mentioned, we have a disability gymnastics panel that I'm the chair of. And on that panel, we have representatives, disability representatives from each of the disciplines who provide competitive activity. These discipline reps also sit on the technical committee for their discipline. So for example, our women's artistic rep goes along to all of the women's technical committee meetings and feeds into any plans that they have for developing competitions or any other activity. This is also supported by Jess and her team and other departments at British Gymnastics, such as events or education. So if you look at the slide, you can see the different disciplines that are involved in competitive activity for disability gymnastics across the UK. Those in blue are the ones that are most developed, I would say, that have the highest numbers. So this is generally the Olympic disciplines. Artistic and trampolining in particular have the most developed programmes and have the most active clubs and competitors. Okay, so I just want to move on to one example, and this is trampolining, which I think is probably the discipline that is working best, I would say, in terms of an integrated approach. So in trampolining, we have a situation where our disability rep works really closely with the technical committee, is involved in all stages of the planning in terms of rules, in terms of how they plan for events, and the disability pathway is very much integrated into the mainstream pathway. So gymnasts compete at a local, regional and national level at the same time as their mainstream peers and follow the same processes. This means that coaches and judges can go between mainstream and disability relatively easily. The rules are aligned, the competition format is aligned, and this has resulted in large numbers of disability gymnasts taking part in this activity, and that's grown year on year. So what I want to do is just show you a little video of the British finals in which there is a disability final included. So Max, are you able to show the first video? And this is a trampolinist who competes under Class 1, so learning disability, and she is performing her set routine, so routine 1. So I think this is quite good to show because you can see that there's lots of activity in the background. There's a tumble competition going on, there's a DMT competition going on, and I think because of that, it's busy. Lots of people are seeing the disability competitors, and we can see that, you know, they're very much integrated into that event. If we look at women's artistic next, which I think is also developing fairly well, what they focus on is integrating the planning for disability gymnastics into their wider planning. So this is a kind of flow chart of the competitive pathways for women's artistic, and within that we have the disability pathway. So that's the part that's circled in yellow is a disability pathway, and again it aligns with the mainstream pathway. The rules are similar, the judges can move between both, the coaches can move between both. And I would say that our disability rep is very much involved in the conversations on how the sport is going to develop more widely, and disability is always part of that conversation because she sits on that technical committee. They also have recently produced a resource, for example, for judges, where they're updating their qualifications, and within that they have included disability examples, disability routines for the judges to practice with. So I think we're hoping that all of these initiatives that the Women's Technical Committee are taking will encourage more clubs to take part, and more clubs to take part in these competitions. So integrated events, I think, are one of the key ways that we can raise the profile of competitive disability gymnasts, and provide opportunities for them to be visible in the competitive community. So what I've done on this slide here is just giving you some examples of events that do this in the UK. So we have the first couple of pictures there come from the Scottish Championships, where my gymnasts take part in a disability masters apparatus competition at the same time as the mainstream apparatus finals on the Sunday. So this happens with the same panels of judges in the same arena at the same time, and again I think raises the profile of these gymnasts. We have a similar situation with the Welsh Championships, who include a disability element, and also some of you might know of the London Open, the big men's artistic competition that we run in the UK. They have a disability element to their competition too, where you can enter gymnasts at their age group level throughout the weekend. And this means that we have our top disability gymnasts competing alongside Max Whitlock, who we have in the photo here, and lots of other kind of, you know, high profile gymnasts. The other event that I want to draw your attention to is the British Disability Masters, which currently we hold as part of our British Championships, our mainstream British Championships. So the top disability gymnasts from our disability championships are selected to compete at this event. So again, I just want to show you a short video of this to show you the way in which it's integrated into the wider event. So this is Sophie. Sophie is a class 2 physical disability gymnast, and this is her competing at the Disability Masters at the British Championships. So at the same time that Sophie is competing, there's a beam final going on, there's a bars final going on, there's a pommels final going on, so that the crowd are there to see the mainstream event and also the disability event at the same time. And as I say, Sophie qualified for this through the Disability Championship. So we select the top gymnasts from the Disability Championships to attend this event. We don't have sound, I can sing, but I don't think anyone would appreciate that. But this is such a positive experience for these gymnasts, I think, to be included in such an event, and really it raises the profile, but it gives them something to aim for, which I think is really important, that it's really the pinnacle of their career to get to compete at this competition. Okay, so if we move on then to talk a little bit about my own club. So Sophie, who you just seen, is one of the gymnasts that comes from my club, and we have a dedicated disability section within our club. We have around 50 gymnasts who take part in various levels of competitive activity weekly. We have men's artistic, women's artistic and rhythmic gymnastics groups. We are probably one of the most successful clubs in terms of disability gymnasts in the UK, and what I want to do is just take you through a couple of reasons why I think that is the case. And I think the most important thing is going back to what Jess was telling you earlier on, is that we have an inclusive, open environment within our club. We have gymnasts and coaches who move between groups, who move between sessions, who train in parallel. Our sessions are dedicated, but they happen at the same time as the mainstream groups. So we have a situation where, for example, our men's artistic squad are training on P-bars at the same time as our gymnasts who compete in the Commonwealth Games or the Northern Europeans, so that the coaches are working with both groups, and both groups are kind of doing the same activity at the same time. I also think one of the reasons this works, and it's worked even better in the last few years, is that we're often aiming for the same competitions. So the picture that I have here is from the Scottish Championships, and this is the whole club. This is the mainstream gymnasts and the disability gymnasts who are all competing at the same event, to the same panels of judges, the same medal ceremony. So we're very much there as a unit, and I think that that has kind of increased the respect level amongst the gymnasts, who, you know, they're all aiming for that same event. They're all aiming for the same outcome. And another thing I think that works well is that our coaching team is made up of, or at least partly made up of, ex-gymnasts. So Sophie, who you've seen on the slide earlier, is now one of our coaches for our top disability gymnasts. And in fact, 4 of the coaches on that picture there are ex-disability gymnasts. And not only do they work with the disability competitive gymnasts, they also work with the development groups, the mainstream development groups, and the mainstream performance groups. So they work across the club. And I think these are a couple of things that have made that approach quite successful. And if we just move on to the next slide, the last thing I kind of want to say, sorry, the one before that. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Oh, okay, I'll just talk you through it. So another thing that we do as a club is we look for opportunities for other types of activity. So we take part in festivals, we link in with other clubs, we have training camps, we attend local mainstream competitions, where we ask them to put on a disability element to their competition at times. So there are lots of opportunities at all levels for your gymnasts, and sometimes it's about going out and finding these opportunities for yourself. It's not all about kind of national level competitions. I think that local initiatives can work well as well. So moving on to the last slide then, and a lot of this feeds back into what Jess was talking about in the earlier part of the presentation. But I think we've had lots of success as a club. We've had lots of success, I think, across the UK in developing competitive disability gymnastics, but there is a long way to go. And I think these are some of the challenges that we still face. Attitudes, you know, Jess spoke earlier on about people being anxious about coaching disability gymnasts. That attitude is still a challenge. There are, you know, coaches, clubs, people within disciplines who I think are still a little bit anxious or not necessarily that enthusiastic about disability gymnastics. So that's something that we have to grapple with. We also have to think about resources. You know, where are the resources going to come from? Where does disability gymnastics sit within your organisation? Where does it sit within your club? How are you going to fund that? It can require extra funding in some cases. We rely certainly in our club heavily on volunteers. So where are you going to source these volunteers? How are you going to make sure you have a budget to train them, to make sure that they go on the correct courses? Also, organisational. If you're going to include a disability gymnastics element in a competition, is there space within the timetable? Can you find space within the timetable? And that's certainly a challenge we have as the disciplines grow, is how do we fit all of these extra gymnasts within existing events? And I think that will continue to be a challenge. An additional point to make, I think, is that COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on many of our gymnasts, quite a few of whom would have been shielding during the pandemic and have taken longer perhaps to get back into the gym, to get back into training. In many cases have missed a year and a half of physical activity. So there are obviously issues there, and perhaps projects that need to be done in the future to try and bring some of those gymnasts back into the sport. And lastly, I think that one of the challenges we face is in terms of international activity, and that's why I'm so thankful that you've asked for us to come and speak today, and hopefully this is a step in the right direction. Ultimately, my aim certainly is for gymnastics to be a Paralympic sport and for these gymnasts to have somewhere to compete on the international stage. And in order to do that, it's really important that we build these international connections, and that we look at how we can expand that area of our sport. So I'm aware that we're kind of out of time, so I'm going to finish there. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica and Angela. This is so impressive work you've been doing, and so interesting to listen to this, and inspiring, of course.